Mace Windu is in the midst of a fierce battle against the Sith Lord Palpatine in the heart of the Senate. The echoes of lightsabers resound through the corridors, while the shadows cast by the fallen bodies of the Jedi lengthen around them. Windu's allies were quickly slaughtered, victims of the Sith Lord's cruelty and skill. Now, only he stands between Palpatine and total control of the galaxy. Every blow he exchanges with the enemy is a mixture of tension, dexterity, and urgency. Windu knows that this is his last chance to eliminate the man truly responsible for the war that is tearing the Republic apart. The duel seems endless, but Windu, a master of Vapad, stands firm, waiting for the right moment to disarm Palpatine. In one swift and powerful move, Windu finally manages to disarm Palpatine, knocking his lightsaber to the ground. The Sith's wrinkled, evil face contorts into an expression of false vulnerability. Windu knows he can't fall for the Sith Lord's tricks, since the corruption of the galaxy depends on his survival. However, just as Windu prepares to strike the fatal blow, Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, appears in the room. The tension immediately rises. Windu sees the conflict in Anakin's eyes and, as much as he warns him about the dangers of letting Palpatine live, the young Jedi doesn't listen. In a desperate gesture, Anakin cuts off Windu's arm, giving Palpatine the opening he needs to attack. Force lightning shoots out of Palpatine's hands, hitting Windu squarely and throwing him out of the window. As he falls, Windu tries to regain control, ignoring the pain the Force lightning is causing in his body. Just like in the clone attack when Obi-Wan jumped out of Padme's window chasing a drone, he manages to use the Force to support himself on a moving vehicle. Concentrating as hard as he can, he uses his connection to the Force to stabilize himself and guide his fall. His Jedi reflexes, although weakened by the shock, are still fast enough for him to successfully lean over an aerial vehicle passing below. When the vehicle descends, Windu can barely get his feet on the ground. The landing was just the beginning of a new battle for Windu. He finds himself seriously injured, the consequences of Palpatine's attack being more severe than he expected. Electricity runs through his body, causing uncontrollable spasms and a feeling of extreme weakness. He feels as if his legs can barely support him. Even so, knowing the urgency of the situation, Windu tries to move quickly away from the busy streets of Coruscant, seeking refuge in a dark alley. Each step is a monumental effort, his mind trying to focus, but his body resisting any command. The shocks caused by Palpatine's rays become even more unbearable as Windu tries to move. With every attempt to stand up, his body responds with violent spasms that knock him back to the ground. He is aware that he cannot remain there for long. Palpatine is now free to carry out his plans, and Anakin's betrayal must be communicated to the remaining Jedi. However, his strength is fading fast. The spasms prevent him from walking more than a few meters, until finally his vision begins to dim and he collapses in a small dark street, unconscious under the weight of the damage his body has suffered. By the time Windu regains consciousness, hours have passed. He wakes up in the same position in which he fell, his clothes still burned by the lightning and his body still in pain. However, the spasms have subsided. With great effort, he manages to gather enough strength to wave to a passerby who, as luck would have it, helps him get to the Jedi Temple. Each step feels like a burden, but Windu keeps his mind focused on a single goal: to warn the Jedi about Anakin's betrayal and the true danger that Palpatine represents. When he arrives at the temple, however, he is greeted by a devastating scene. The massacre carried out by the clones and by Anakin Skywalker himself has destroyed everything he knew and defended. Inside the Jedi Temple, what Windu finds is not just physical destruction, but the end of an era. The bodies of his fellow Jedi are scattered across the floor, and the silence is broken only by the distant echoes of Windu's footsteps. He realizes that the Jedi Order is in ruins, and that Anakin, now as Darth Vader, has contributed to this disaster. Even in his pain and exhaustion, Windu understands that his survival now has a new purpose. He is one of the few who knows the truth about Palpatine and Vader, and he must find a way to restore hope and prepare the Jedi for a new struggle, even if that struggle is only to survive in the shadow of the Empire that is being born. Leaving the Jedi Temple, Mace Windu was immediately confronted with the harsh reality of Order 66. The massacre of the Jedi was underway, and Imperial soldiers now patrolled every corner of Coruscant, watching and eliminating the Order's survivors. Windu, still weakened by the effects of Palpatine's attack, realized that any attempt to confront the troops would be suicide. His hands were tied. He was forced to hide in the shadows, unable to help his fellow Jedi directly. The desolation he felt was immense, but Windu knew that to defeat the Empire in that state would be impossible. He would need to recover and devise a more strategic plan. While he hid in a safe place and tried to recover physically, Windu couldn't stop thinking about the future. He had to act, but the question was, how? The pain in his body was almost insignificant compared to the pain of seeing the Jedi Order destroyed. The only hope left was to find out if any Jedi were still alive. Could Yoda, the great master, have survived? What about Obi-Wan and the others? Windu knew that, if he was to have a fighting chance, he had to find allies. So, while his body slowly recovered, his mind began to plan his next steps. He would need to seek the support of someone trustworthy and loyal to the Jedi cause. After days of observation, Windu waited until the movement on the streets of Coruscant subsided. With Imperial soldiers patrolling every corner, he knew that discretion would be crucial. As soon as he had a chance, Windu decided to seek out Bail Organa, one of the Jedi's greatest allies and a respected leader on Alderaan. Bail had a prominent position in the Senate and had always been a supporter of the Jedi cause, and Windu knew he could offer shelter and support. It was a risk, but Windu saw no other choice. His strength was returning, but he knew his body needed help. On arriving in Alderaan, Windu was greeted with care by Bail Organa. Bail, always a figure of serenity and calm, immediately took him to a safe place. Before taking him for medical treatment, Bail made a point of updating Windu on the events that had taken place since the start of Order 66. Yoda and Obi-Wan were alive, much to Windu's relief. Knowing that two of the most powerful Jedi Masters were still alive brought a glimmer of hope to Windu, something he hadn't felt since his battle with Palpatine. However, Bail had more news to share. With a grave expression, he led Windu to a discreet wing of the infirmary. There, a small baby lay. "That's Leia Skywalker," said Bail in a heavy voice, explaining that the child was the daughter of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. Windu was stunned. Padme had given birth to twins, and Leia was one of Anakin's heirs. The other baby, Luke, is on Tatooine with Anakin's family. Obi-Wan is there, looking after him, added Bail. The gravity of the situation gripped Windu, who understood how crucial it was to protect these children, as they could represent the future of the galaxy. Intrigued, Windu asked why the children hadn't been taken to Naboo with their mother. Bail, with a sorrowful look on his face, bowed his head and replied sadly, "Padme didn't survive the birth." Bail went on to explain that Yoda believed that the best way to protect the twins from Palpatine would be to separate them, so that their tracks would be harder to follow. Every decision had been carefully thought out to keep the children safe. "Now you must rest," said Bail, noticing the fatigue on Windu's face. The Jedi Master, despite being one of the most powerful figures in the Order, was exhausted both physically and emotionally. Organa assured him that he was safe there, and that no one would find him in that hideout on Alderaan. Mace Windu was taken for medical treatment, where they tended to his wounds and the damage caused by Palpatine's Force lightning. In addition, he received a new mechanical hand to replace the one Anakin had cut off. The new prosthesis was advanced, almost imperceptible, which allowed Windu to regain his physical abilities. Even so, he knew that the real battle had only just begun. Knowing that the damage caused by Palpatine's rise had already been done, and that the Jedi Order had been devastated, Mace Windu took advantage of Alderaan's tranquility and serenity to reflect and organize a counterattack plan. The peaceful landscape of the planet contrasted sharply with the chaotic situation in the galaxy, but Windu knew that this calm was temporary. The Empire, under Palpatine's command, would soon reach every corner of the galaxy, and he needed to act before it was too late. Every minute of silence on Alderaan was an opportunity to chart a new path. Windu had always had a very distinct personality from Obi-Wan and Yoda. While both were known for their patience and caution, Windu was a man of action, driven by a deep conviction in justice. He believed in the power of acting directly against evil, rather than waiting for opportunities. This difference was what made his desire for revenge and justice so burning. He couldn't bear the thought of hiding in the shadows while Palpatine, the Sith he defeated and almost eliminated, ruled the galaxy with impunity. For him, inaction was not an option. His warrior spirit wouldn't allow it. The idea of living in hiding, without taking action, seemed unbearable to Windu. Knowing that he had come so close to eliminating Palpatine, to putting an end to the Sith threat, and now seeing him at the height of his power was a heavy burden to bear. The failure of his mission was not just a personal defeat, but the collapse of everything he and the Jedi stood for. The Empire was shaping the galaxy in its own image, corrupting everything around it, and Windu felt it was his destiny to fight against it, even if he was outnumbered. It was more than a duty, it was a matter of honor and purpose. With this impulse, Windu began to devise a meticulous plan, something that could undermine Palpatine's power and restore some balance to the galaxy. Knowing that brute force would not be enough, he needed to be strategic and use all the resources at his disposal. Fortunately, Bail Organa was a powerful ally, with access to privileged information from the Senate and other resistance movements that were beginning to form. Together, they began to discuss the possibilities. Windu knew he couldn't defeat the Empire alone, but if he could gather allies and destabilize the regime from within, there was a chance of success. Organa had a lot of valuable information about the Imperial movements, the resistance forces, and the planets that were beginning to rebel against the new regime. This data would be crucial to Windu's plan. He not only wanted to fight the Empire in a direct confrontation, but also to dismantle its operations in the shadows, weakening the foundations of Palpatine's power. This strategy needed to be carefully planned, involving sabotage, alliances, and surgical actions against specific Imperial targets. Victory would require a combination of strength, cunning, and patience. During their conversations, Windu and Organa knew that they couldn't trust everyone. The Empire had infiltrated every part of the galaxy, and many influential figures in the Senate and on other planets now served Palpatine. The choices of who to involve and how to act would be fundamental to the success of the plan. Windu knew that any misstep could cost the lives of his allies, and he had already witnessed how quickly the Jedi were exterminated. Trust and secrecy would be crucial. At the same time, Windu felt that he needed to recover completely before going into action. His mechanical hand, although advanced, was still a physical reminder of the battle that had almost destroyed him. He knew that his full strength had not yet returned, and the damage caused by Palpatine's Force lightning had left deep scars. But with Organa's support and his growing determination, he was convinced that it wouldn't be long before he was ready to face Palpatine again. After many hours of careful analysis and intense conversations, Windu and Bail Organa came to the conclusion that, without the support of Yoda and Obi-Wan, it would be extremely difficult to defeat Palpatine. Bail's information was valuable, but still insufficient to directly confront the most powerful Sith Lord in the galaxy. Windu, determined not to give up, knew he had to gather as many allies as possible. And to do so, he must first seek the advice of Yoda, one of the few Jedi Masters still alive. So Windu set off for the remote swamp planet of Dagobah, where Yoda had gone into exile. On arriving there, Windu was greeted with surprise by Yoda. The great Jedi Master hadn't expected to see his old friend again, especially after everything that had happened to the Jedi Order. Yoda gave his version of the events he had witnessed. He told of his own confrontation with Palpatine and how he had to go into exile to preserve what was left of the Jedi Order. Yoda was aware that the future of the galaxy was bleak, and he saw little chance of reversing the course of events at that time. As he spoke, Yoda constantly warned of the danger of the uncertain and bleak future. He believed that, with the Empire now in total control, little could be done without great sacrifices. The wise Jedi Master felt that the Order's time had passed and that direct resistance could be dangerous. However, Windu, driven by his strong sense of justice and the pain of having seen Palpatine rise to power, insisted. He claimed that he couldn't live with Palpatine ruling the galaxy, especially when he had come so close to destroying the Sith Lord. Yoda, however, was not convinced by Windu's arguments. He warned his former companion about the dangers of the dark side of the Force. The desire to defeat Palpatine could easily turn into a personal vendetta, which would inevitably lead Windu down the same path as Anakin. The Jedi Master recalled that many before him had succumbed to the dark side by allowing their emotions to dominate their actions. However, after much reflection, Yoda agreed that, even at the risk, they should seek out Obi-Wan. Perhaps he could convince him to join the cause. Yoda and Windu then set off for Tatooine, where Obi-Wan was hiding. When they arrived at the cave where Obi-Wan lived in exile, they found a man very different from the firm and serene Jedi they had known. Obi-Wan, now a hermit on a desert planet, was still tormented by the events of Mustafar. He told of the confrontation with Anakin and what he believed to be the tragic end of his former Padawan. In Obi-Wan's mind, Anakin was dead, consumed by the dark side and destroyed by his own actions. Windu then shared his plans with Obi-Wan, hoping to find some encouragement in his old friend. However, what he found was an emotionally devastated Obi-Wan, unable to see any hope in facing Palpatine again. The pain of having lost Anakin to the dark side consumed him, and the weight of guilt prevented him from acting clearly. Windu, sensing Obi-Wan's hesitation, began to insist, trying to get his friend back into action. But his efforts seemed in vain, until he resorted to a stronger argument. "Your Padawan helped destroy the Republic, Obi-Wan," Windu said firmly. "You must make amends." Those words resonated deeply with Obi-Wan. He knew Windu was right. Anakin, the Chosen One, had become responsible for the collapse of everything the Jedi stood for, and Obi-Wan felt that he had failed not only his Padawan, but the entire galaxy. After much reflection, Obi-Wan admitted that Windu was right. There was a duty to be done, and perhaps there was still a chance to correct his mistakes. But there was one problem he couldn't ignore. Obi-Wan then raised a question that had been weighing on his mind for a long time. "If I go and something happens to me, what will become of Luke? Who will protect him? Who will train him when the time comes?" Luke, Anakin's son, was one of the last hopes for the galaxy, and Obi-Wan knew that his safety was of vital importance. He couldn't risk the boy's life, because Luke could be the key to defeating Palpatine in the future. Windu understood Obi-Wan's dilemma, but still believed that the risk was worth it. Yoda, who had been following the conversation, agreed with Obi-Wan's sentiments. He knew that Luke's protection was crucial, and that if Obi-Wan went to confront Palpatine, it would put the future of the galaxy at risk. He suggested a compromise. If Obi-Wan went, he should remain in the background, leaving the task of confronting Palpatine to him and Windu. With this strategy, Obi-Wan could guarantee Luke's safety and, at the same time, be available to help if necessary. In that cave on Tatooine, what remained of the once powerful Jedi Council, now reduced to just 3 masters, Mace Windu, Yoda, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, made a crucial decision. Led by Windu, they agreed that they could no longer stay hidden while the Galactic Empire gained strength. It was time to confront the new threat directly. The Jedi Order had almost been destroyed, but the spirit of resistance was still alive in their hearts. And so, right there in the isolation of Tatooine, the plan to confront Palpatine began to be drawn up. They knew it would be a suicide mission, but they also knew that this was perhaps their only chance of trying to weaken the Empire in its early days. The 3 Jedi then traveled to Alderaan, where Bail Organa awaited them with his network of informants and limited resources. Bail, always loyal to the Jedi cause, helped them devise a more elaborate plan to infiltrate the capital and eliminate the Emperor. It was an arduous and almost impossible task, but Bail had important contacts and knew how to manipulate the Empire's channels to obtain vital information. In secret meetings, Windu and Yoda worked out the strategy with Bail, aware that each step had to be perfectly calculated so as not to alert the Empire's agents. During one of these meetings, Bail received crucial information from his informants. Palpatine was not in the capital at the moment. Instead, he had retreated to the newly designated Imperial command ship, where he was personally overseeing the integration of the military forces and the political reorganization of the galaxy under the Empire's rule. It was a rare opportunity to strike directly at the heart of the regime and Windu knew they couldn't afford to miss it. The Imperial ship was more vulnerable than usual, and a coordinated attack could surprise even the Sith Lord. In the meantime, one of Bail's contacts, linked to an initial resistance cell that was beginning to form on Dantooine, reported that they had seized a small Imperial ship on one of the trade routes. The idea of using this captured ship to infiltrate the Imperial fleet immediately came up. The plan was audacious. The three Jedi would use the ship to penetrate the defenses of Palpatine's Imperial ship. This approach would be risky, but the only way to get close enough to the Emperor to carry out the attack without arousing suspicion. So the three Jedi Masters set off in the direction of where the captured Imperial ship was parked. When they arrived, they assumed their roles and identified themselves as members of the original crew, using the ship to join the Imperial fleet. The first part of the plan worked perfectly. They got permission to dock on Palpatine's Imperial ship without raising any alarms. As soon as they landed, Windu and Yoda quickly eliminated the guards in the landing area and began to infiltrate the ship's corridors. Obi-Wan, as agreed, stayed behind, hidden in the smaller ship, keeping in touch with a communicator to coordinate any eventualities. As Yoda and Windu advanced through the Imperial ship, carefully avoiding the security systems and guards, the tension grew. Every move had to be precise and discretion was essential. They were entering Palpatine's territory, the most dangerous place in the galaxy at that moment. The objective was clear: get to the Sith Lord and somehow take him down before he could realize the attack. Windu, determined and focused, led the way, while Yoda remained at his side, silent but ready to act. The fate of the galaxy was at stake, and every second counted. As Yoda and Windu advanced through the dark, metallic corridors of the Imperial ship, something began to bother Obi-Wan, who remained at the rear. It was a strange sensation, a familiar presence, but at the same time extremely aggressive. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to identify the source of that disturbing feeling. It was then that he realized that presence was something he knew, something that deeply terrified him. Obi-Wan quickly picked up the communicator and warned Yoda and Windu about what he was sensing. "Stay alert," he said. "There is something, or someone, very dangerous here." As Yoda and Windu continued to move around the ship, they both began to feel Palpatine's presence growing stronger. The darkness seemed to tighten around them, choking every breath, while the sense of imminent danger grew with every step. Palpatine was close, they were sure of it. Their Jedi senses were on high alert, and they both knew that a battle was about to begin. The air seemed charged with tension, and Windu held his lightsaber tightly, prepared for any confrontation. It was then, as they turned down a corridor, that they came across an imposing figure. Wearing shiny black armor and breathing mechanically and terrifyingly was Darth Vader. The sight of that dark, imposing figure made Windu instantly draw his new purple lightsaber. He didn't know who or what that creature was, but the evil aura around Vader was unmistakable. "Mace Windu," said Vader in a cold, metallic voice. "I'm surprised you survived." Yoda and Windu looked at each other in confusion, trying to understand how that shadowy figure knew Windu. Before they could react, a familiar voice sounded behind them. "It's Anakin," exclaimed Obi-Wan, who had followed his instincts and left his position to join the two Jedi. He had finally recognized the presence that had been bothering him. It was his former Padawan, Anakin Skywalker, now transformed into the terrible figure known as Darth Vader. Yoda and Windu looked back, surprised by what Obi-Wan had just said. Anakin was alive, but in a way they could never have imagined. Their minds struggled to process what was before their eyes. Obi-Wan advanced a few steps, still shocked by the sight of his former apprentice completely corrupted by the dark side of the Force. "Obi-Wan," said Darth Vader with contempt, as he raised his red lightsaber. Obi-Wan, his gaze fixed on his former Padawan, knew that he would have to face the worst nightmare of his life. He turned to Yoda and Windu and said, "Go, I'll take care of him." The two Jedi hesitated for a moment. This was not the original plan, but Obi-Wan, feeling the weight of the responsibility he bore, insisted firmly. "Go." Reluctantly, Yoda and Windu nodded and headed down a side corridor, leaving Obi-Wan face to face with Darth Vader. As soon as the two Jedi Masters were out of sight, Vader activated his lightsaber, and the red blade lit up the corridor with a menacing glow. "Your story ends here, Obi-Wan," said Vader, in a voice full of anger. Obi-Wan, still struggling to process the sight of Anakin like that, looked deeply into Vader's eyes and said sadly, "I'm sorry, Anakin," but Vader, with latent hatred, replied coldly, "Anakin is dead. Killed him." And then the familiar sound of lightsabers filling the air cut through the silence. The duel between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader began. And then the familiar sound of lightsabers filling the air cut through the silence. The duel between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader began. Windu and Yoda finally reached what seemed to be the Emperor's chamber, given the number of guards gathered at the door. The atmosphere was heavy, and they both felt the dark presence of Palpatine dominating the space. Without hesitation, Windu took the lead and, with quick, precise movements, eliminated the guards protecting the entrance. The blades of the lightsabers cut through the air, and soon the way was clear. The two Jedi Masters entered the room, where the Emperor was waiting for them, his back turned, watching the emptiness through the large glass panel in front of him. When Palpatine turned around, the cold, sarcastic smile he flashed surprised neither of them. "Mace Windu, you're alive," he said dismissively. His malevolent eyes then turned to Master Yoda. "Master Yoda, I see that the great masters have survived." There was a tone of derision in his voice, as if he were mocking their resistance. Windu, full of restrained anger, looked the Sith Lord straight in the eye and said firmly, "This time you will not be arrested, my lord." His words carried a deadly intensity and, in one swift movement, he activated his purple lightsaber. Palpatine, sensing Windu's seriousness, put aside his sarcasm and activated his own red blade, while his countenance closed into a grim expression. Yoda, standing next to Windu, also switched on his green saber, but before he could act, Windu interrupted him and signaled him to move away. Yoda hesitated for a moment, looking at Windu suspiciously, but decided to retreat to the rear. The fight between Windu and Palpatine resumed, this time in the center of the Emperor's power, his Imperial ship. Windu attacked with a visceral fury, his quick, powerful blows reflecting the anger he had been carrying since the last confrontation. The intensity of his movements was remarkable, but Yoda, watching from a distance, began to notice something alarming. Windu's anger was taking over, driving his attacks in a way that was not typical of a Jedi. The dark side of the Force seemed to be influencing his companion, and this made Yoda worry. The lightsabers clashed fiercely, creating sparks of energy in the air. Windu pressed Palpatine with everything he had, attacking with a speed that seemed insane. Palpatine, despite his formidable skill, was being pushed back, struggling to maintain control of the battle. The room became a chaos of red and purple lights, and the blows echoed off the metal walls. Each of Windu's moves seemed more ruthless than the last, while Palpatine did everything he could to defend himself. Finally, in a precise and merciless move, Windu managed to disarm Palpatine, cutting off the hand holding the Sith Lord's red saber. Palpatine staggered backwards, screaming in pain and clutching what was left of his arm. The red blade of his saber went out as he fell to the ground in front of Windu, in a vulnerable position for the first time. Windu, panting and full of rage, advanced on the defeated Emperor, his eyes blazing with fury. "I was too dangerous to stay alive," said Windu in a deep voice, repeating the words he had used against Palpatine in their last encounter. And then, with a slow, cruel movement, Windu plunged his purple lightsaber into Palpatine's chest, as the Sith Lord stared at him in agony. Windu's anger overflowed at that moment, and he almost roared as he eliminated the man who had caused the galaxy so much suffering. Yoda, who was watching everything, was horrified by the scene, recognizing what was happening inside Windu. "Mace Windu, come on," said Yoda, his voice calm but concerned. The Jedi Master sensed the imbalance in his companion, and now, more than ever, knew that they needed to get out of there before the dark side corrupted Windu even further. But Windu stood still, staring at Palpatine's body, his face still contorted with rage. He breathed heavily, trying to process his victory, but the darkness enveloped him. Yoda approached Windu, feeling that he needed to act quickly. "We need to get out of here, my friend," Yoda said softly, trying to calm his Jedi friend. Windu, still full of fury, began to back away slowly, walking backwards while keeping his gaze fixed on Palpatine's body. Victory, however, did not bring the satisfaction he had hoped for. When he finally turned to leave the room, something caught his eye. Through the large glass panel, he could see an adjoining room full of Empire officers, all terrified by what had just happened. They had witnessed the death of their leader, the Emperor, and now they were trapped there with no way out. Windu, with a dangerous glint in his eyes, reached out and, with the Force, opened the door to the room. Yoda, sensing Windu's intentions, tried to intervene. "No, my friend," said Yoda in a calm, concerned voice. But Windu, overcome by anger and a desire for revenge, didn't listen. "This empire ends today," replied Windu, his voice full of determination. Without hesitation, he entered the room, switching on his lightsaber. Within seconds, the shouts of the Imperial officers filled the air, but they were soon silenced as Windu eliminated all the high-ranking members there, one by one. The room filled with silence. When Windu left, he walked straight past Yoda, who was watching him with an increasingly worried countenance. "Let's go," said Windu, without looking at the Jedi Master, as if nothing had happened. Yoda, sensing that something was deeply wrong with his friend, followed him, saying nothing, but clearly uneasy. The two began to walk through the corridors of the ship, when suddenly they heard the unmistakable sound of lightsabers clashing somewhere nearby. The noise came from an adjoining room, and they both quickly made their way there. When they reached the hall, the scene unfolding in front of them was one of pure destruction. Obi-Wan and Darth Vader were in the throes of an intense battle, their sabers clashing violently as debris flew around them. The duel between master and apprentice was brutal, each blow reverberating through the hall. Windu, without hesitation, entered the room, prepared to intervene. Yoda, sensing that something was wrong, tried to follow him, but before he could pass through the door, Windu abruptly closed it using the Force. He then destroyed the opening panel next to the door with a swift blow from his saber. Windu looked directly into the eyes of Yoda, who now stood on the other side of the door, powerless to stop him. Windu's gaze was cold, distant, completely different from the Jedi Yoda knew. Something had changed in him since Palpatine's death, and now the Jedi Master could clearly see the danger this represented. Windu, without saying a word, turned and walked towards Obi-Wan and Vader, who were still fighting fiercely near the other entrance to the hall. The tension in the air was palpable. Obi-Wan, focused on the fight against his former apprentice, didn't notice Windu approaching from behind. It was then that, in a sudden movement, Windu reached out and used the Force to throw Obi-Wan out of the hall. The blow was so swift and unexpected that Obi-Wan barely had time to react. His body was flung away, hitting the walls of the next corridor. Windu then repeated the same gesture as before, destroying the opening system of the other door, locking himself inside the hall with Darth Vader. Now, in the great battle hall, only Windu and Vader remained. Yoda, still outside, watched with a growing sense of helplessness. He knew that the confrontation that was about to take place there would be devastating, not just for the two combatants, but for the fate of the galaxy. Windu, overcome with rage and determined to put an end to the Empire once and for all, shouted, "Go away!" But Obi-Wan and Yoda, despite understanding the danger and gravity of the situation, hesitated. They both looked at each other, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. Neither of them had the courage to leave Windu at that moment. The tension was enormous and they stood still, waiting for the fight to unfold. Windu, for his part, turned to Darth Vader, now Anakin Skywalker completely consumed by the dark side, and declared firmly, "The story of the Chosen One ends here." With heavy breathing coming mechanically from his mask, Vader advanced against Windu with implacable fury. The duel between them began, with purple and red lightsabers clashing violently, filling the hall with sparks and deafening sounds. The fight was intense, with both combatants using all their skills. Vader, taking advantage of the environment, used the Force to hurl debris at Windu, but the Jedi Master deftly dodged, repelling each attack with the same force. The battle was even, but both were being pushed to the limit. In a moment of advantage, Vader climbed onto a large piece of debris, gaining a higher position to attack Windu from above. The scene was somewhat reminiscent of the previous confrontation between Obi-Wan and Anakin on Mustafar, but this time the outcome would be different. Windu looked quickly at Obi-Wan and Yoda, who were still watching, and said once again, "This empire ends today." His words carried a certainty that made Yoda and Obi-Wan hesitate even more. And then, with a sudden movement, Windu detached a huge piece of metal from the ceiling with the Force, causing it to fall directly on him and Vader. The impact was devastating. The piece of metal crushed everything in its path, making the ground shake beneath their feet. Yoda, his eyes wide, watched the scene in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, shouted no. His cry echoed through the empty hall, but it was too late. Dust and debris completely covered the area, and there was no sign that Windu or Vader had survived. Faced with the devastating scene, Yoda understood that there was nothing more to be done there. He bowed his head and regretfully turned to leave. Obi-Wan, still reluctant to accept what had happened, looked around the wreckage, hoping to see some sign of life. However, on seeing Yoda's movement, he decided to follow the Jedi Master, knowing that it was the only way left. With one last look at the destroyed hall, Obi-Wan turned and left through the other door. The two Jedi Masters moved quickly away from the Imperial ship, aware that they needed to act immediately to ensure that Windu's sacrifice was not in vain. As soon as they left the ship, Yoda and Obi-Wan contacted Bail Organa, informing him of what had happened. They reported Palpatine's death and Windu's sacrifice, asking Bail to warn the Senate and the rebels to seize the opportunity and launch an attack on the Empire. With the leadership of Palpatine, Vader, and the generals destroyed, there was a real chance to regain control of the Republic and start rebuilding. This was the first step towards a new hope.